Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is hand. Let's take a look at one of the ways this verb is used. You might hear someone use the verb hand to mean to pick something up and give it to someone. So maybe we can imagine that we're in the kitchen doing a little bit of cooking and we ask a family member, hand me the salt, right? So pick up the container that has salt and give it to me. You should know that hand is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, we're just going to add ing to form handy. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. The base verb, hand, ends in a d sound. So our ed is going to make an id sound. We're going to add an extra syllable. So it should sound like this. Handed, handed. Now, I just gave you one definition of hand, and that's because there are a number of phrasal verbs that incorporate this verb. And so we're going to spend some time now looking at some additional meanings or usages for this particular verb. And you'll see from the top part of my screen, this is just part 1 of part 2, so we won't do any additional verb tense practice today, so that this doesn't become a 20-minute video. Let's start with our first phrasal verb. It's hand back. This connects very nicely to the meaning we just looked at. So now we are returning something to someone. Let's look at an example sentence. The teacher will hand back the tests at the end of class. So what this means is the teacher is returning them. She's giving them back to the students, likely after having graded them. Another phrasal verb you might hear is hand down. This can have a couple different meanings. The first is to pass something from one person to another. Many times when we use this, we're talking about generations. So let's look at an example sentence. My grandmother has handed down some beautiful jewelry to me. So the jewelry has been passed from one family member to another. A second way to use the phrasal verb hand down is to mean to announce a decision. Let's look at another example. The court handed down its decision yesterday. So many times this particular meaning is used in reference to the Supreme Court, could be in reference to other appellate courts. And again, the idea here is they announced their ruling, they announced their decision. The next phrasal verb we're going to take a look at is hand in. This means to give something for someone. Let me say it again, to give something to someone in order that that person can review it or accept it. So let's look at another example sentence. When I decided to quit my old job, I handed in my resignation letter 2 weeks in advance. This is a really common practice in the United States to give 2 weeks notice. Some organizations may require more or less time. So it's always good to look at your individual company's policy. But again, the idea is I just didn't hand them to it. I wanted them to read it, to review it, and sort of accept the resignation. Now, before we look at some additional phrasal verbs, let's do kind of a quick verb tense review. My first example here, will hand back, is an example of simple future. So I'm using will here. It might be the teacher making a promise to do this. It could be a quick decision. It could also be a factual statement. The second sentence here, has handed down, is an example of the present perfect. Here, maybe describing something that occurred at some time in the past, but we don't know when. Was it last week? Was it 5 years ago? Who knows? And the last two examples here are both simple past tense. We can tell that by just the endings here. Now, let's continue looking at a few more phrasal verbs. The next one we're going to look at is hand off. This can have several different meanings. One might be to pass something by hand. So you'll hear this used in some different sports, particularly American football, and that's going to be our example here. The quarterback will hand off the ball. So he's using his hands to pass something. A second way to use the phrasal verb hand off is to mean to transfer ownership, control, or responsibility of something. Let's look at another example here. The CEO is going to hand off control of the company to the COO. So some of the acronyms here might be a little difficult to understand. CEO stands for Chief Executive Officer. It's usually the sort of highest position within an organization. So this is the boss of everyone in a particular company. COO generally stands for Chief Operating Officer. And again, this is someone very high up in the company. And here what the sentence is saying is the CEO is transferring control, transferring that position of supervising everyone, of being in charge to another person. The next phrasal verb we'll look at is hand out. It means to distribute something, to provide or share something. Here's an example sentence. The teacher always hands out news articles in class. So the teacher in this case distributes different pieces of paper with articles to the students. The last phrasal verb we're going to take a look at is hand over. This means, again, someone is giving up control or possession of something. Let's look at an example sentence. The teenager handed over his cell phone to his parents after getting in trouble. So the teenager gave up possession, no longer has his cell phone. It is in the hands now of his parents. So let's do one more quick verb tense review. On this slide, I've talked about future sentences. My first two examples here are both future. So will hand off, again, could be a prediction, could be a fact. Is going to hand off control. This could be in reference to a plan. So both will and be going to are used to express future events. Here, always hands out is telling me this is simple present. This is a habit or a routine that the teacher has. And here is another example of the simple past tense. So even though this sentence doesn't tell us if this happened yesterday, perhaps if we saw the full context, it would be understood. Or maybe we already know the date on which this teenager got in trouble. Now, let's spend a few minutes looking at some words and phrases that are related to our verb of the day, hand. The first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So the exact same spelling, exact same pronunciation. This noun can have a number of different meanings. I've chosen just for us to look at 6 that I think are more likely for you to either hear or see when you're reading. So the first way you might hear the noun hand used is to refer to the end part of a person's arm, right? So you're looking at my hand, includes my palm, my fingers, my thumb, and you can see this meaning in my first example sentence. Hold my hand when we cross the street. So this is something maybe a parent says to their small child in order to keep them safe and well. A second way to use the noun hand is to refer to a round of applause. So clapping might be another. So you might hear someone say, give the band a hand. Right? So they're asking you for you to clap for the performers. A third way to use the noun hand is to refer to a pointer on a clock or a watch that indicates different passing units of time. So Most clocks will have an hour hand, a minute hand, and some also will have a second hand. Those are the units of time. Here's another example sentence. The hour hand is pointing to 10. A fourth way to use the noun hand is to refer to the power to direct something. Okay? Let's look at an example sentence. She had a big hand in this event. So she was in a position of control or power in planning this particular nondescript event. A fifth way to use the noun hand is just to mean help. So an example of this, can you give me a hand? So here, hand means help. And the last way you might hear the noun hand used is to refer to the set of cards that are dealt to a particular person through the course of a card game. Here is another example sentence for this meaning. I have an awful hand this round. So you might imagine as I'm saying that, I'm holding maybe 4 or 5 different playing cards in my hand. Might depend on what the game is. The next word we'll take a look at is the adjective handy. This can have 2 different meanings. We could be referring to or describing something that is convenient or useful. You could see that in this example sentence. This appliance is very handy. So it's very useful. Is just another way to say it. A second way we can use the adjective handy is to describe someone who is skillful. An example of that, she's so handy with a needle. So here I'm saying someone is very skillful at sewing. The last phrase that I'm going to leave you with today is by hand. And when you hear this particular phrase, what it means is an action or an activity has been done by a person and not a machine. Here's an example. This dress was beaded by hand. I hope this video has been helpful for you in understanding the many ways to use the verb hand, as well as the many different noun meanings that come with this word. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.